Snow lashed the palace gates as guards threw a homeless girl into the freezing mud. She crawled back on bleeding hands, wrapping her body around a dying old man they were dragging away like rubbish.
Please don't hurt him. He has done nothing wrong.
Move aside, girl. This does not concern you.
It concerns me. He is cold. He is sick. He needs help.
You filthy beggar, know your place.
Your Grace, have mercy.
Take the old man away.
Stop! You cannot touch him. He is your father.
The cruel duke halted mid-step. The torch flames shook in the wind. Servants stopped breathing. Guards loosened their grip. No soul in England had dared speak of the duke's missing father in 20 long years. The old man lifted a trembling hand toward the duke's face and whispered the childhood name only one person had ever called him. The mighty duke turned pale. For the first time in years, fear entered the eyes of the man everyone feared. But before we reveal what happened next, subscribe now and tell us where you are watching from and what time you found this story tonight. Because only hours earlier, that same girl had been starving beneath the streets of Blackmere, with no bread, no shelter, and no idea that the broken stranger she chose to save would uncover buried lies, bring powerful enemies to their knees, and place her heart in the hands of the most feared man in England.
Your treachery, you are a fool! Please, I was loyal! Loyalty? I see only betrayal! By order of the Duke, wanted the dangerous old man! The Duke's men are here! What has he done? 5,000 for his capture! Spread the word!
Blackmere woke each morning dressed in beauty and built on indifference. The upper streets gleamed with polished stone and brass lamps, where shop windows displayed velvet coats, silver watches, sugared cakes, and imported tea. Only a few streets away, children with hollow cheeks pressed themselves against bakery walls to breathe the smell of bread they would never taste. Old men wrapped in sacks sat beside drains where steam rose from the grates. Women with cracked hands sold wilted flowers in the wind. Blackmere was generous in appearance and stingy in soul. No one understood that better than Lenora Ashby. There had been a time when her mornings began with bells, sunlight, and the steady music of clocks. Her father had owned a narrow but respected shop near the Western Square, where shelves were lined with brass pocket watches, carved mantel clocks, and tiny gears laid in velvet trays. Customers trusted his hands and his honesty. Above the shop were two small rooms with blue curtains, a round oak table, and the smell of fresh bread cooling on the sill. Lenora had once sat beside him by lamplight, learning letters from old invoices while he repaired broken timepieces. He used to say that clocks told more truth than people, because they never pretended to be anything but what they were. Then fever took him in 6 days. The neighbors brought soup, prayers, and pity. Her stepmother brought tears in public and calculation in private. Mrs. Prudence K wore mourning black beautifully and grief dishonestly. Within weeks, she claimed debts no one had heard of, produced papers no one had seen, and announced the shop must be sold to settle accounts. By the time Lenora understood the lies, strangers were carrying away her father's tools. The rooms above the shop were emptied next. Prudence kept the silver spoons, the blankets, the books, and every coin hidden in the flour jar. Lenora was handed a single trunk and told she was an ungrateful burden. Before nightfall, even the trunk was gone, stolen while she slept beneath an alley arch. That was 3 winters ago. Now, Lenora rose each day from the ruins of St. Bartholomew's Chapel beyond the market lane. The roof had long ago fallen in, leaving cracked stone walls and half a tower open to the sky. Rain found its way through every broken corner, and cold settled there like a permanent tenant. She slept on layered sacks beneath what remained of an altar, and kept her few belongings wrapped in cloth beneath loose stones. At dawn, she crossed into the city before merchants opened. She scrubbed fish stalls with freezing water until her fingers numbed. She carried coal for bakers too mean to hire proper boys. She swept mud from tavern steps where drunken men had spat through the night. Payment was rarely money. More often it was a bruised apple, a crust of bread, or permission to stand near a kitchen fire for 10 minutes. Yet she still thanked them. There was something in Lenora that hardship had bent but never broken. She spoke gently to frightened children. She tied rags around a limping dog's paw. She once spent half a day helping an old flower seller gather blossoms scattered by wheels, though it cost her work elsewhere. People noticed her face before they noticed her poverty. Even under winter weariness, she was striking. Clear eyes, delicate features, and dark hair she kept braided when ribbon could be found. But admiration vanished quickly when men saw patched shoes and rough sleeves. Beauty without money was entertainment, not value. So Blackmere learned to look through her. By afternoon, the market square thickened with trade. Butchers shouted prices over hanging meats. Fruit sellers polished pears with sleeves already dirty. Hot chestnuts cracked in iron pans. Steam rose from meat pies stacked behind glass. Lenora's stomach tightened at every smell. She had earned only a stale heel of bread that day. She broke it in two beside the old fountain and whistled softly. 3 stray dogs appeared at once from under a cart. One was blind in one eye, another missing part of an ear, the smallest shivering hard enough to shake. "You look worse than I do," she murmured. She fed them first. Snow clouds gathered by late afternoon, turning the sky the color of pewter. Shopkeepers hurried to cover goods. Coachmen cursed the coming cold. The wealthy climbed into carriages before the streets grew unpleasant. Lenora wrapped her thin shawl tighter and glanced uphill. There, above chimneys and roofs, stood Ashcroft Keep. Its towers were dark against the whitening sky, its windows lit like watchful eyes. Even from a distance, it seemed less a home than a judgment. People in the square lowered their voices whenever the Duke's name was mentioned. Duke Damien Ashcroft. She had never seen him, but stories moved faster than smoke. Some said he once evicted a widow on Christmas Eve for unpaid rent. Others swore he dismissed servants for spilling tea. A butcher claimed the Duke could remember every insult ever spoken and repay it years later. Whether true or not, no one laughed after telling such tales. Lenora wondered what kind of man inspired fear in people who themselves showed so little kindness. The first snow began as light dust across cobbles. She turned toward the chapel ruins before dark, passing the outer market wall where beggars often sheltered from wind. Most places were already taken. Men curled into doorways. An old woman wrapped herself in sacks beside a barrel. Then Lenora saw him. An elderly man in a torn coat staggered once beside the stone wall, as if trying to steady himself against invisible ground. His beard was white with frost. One hand reached outward. Then his knees gave way, and he collapsed face first into the snow. People walked around him. A merchant stepped over his legs carrying oranges. 2 boys laughed and tossed slush near his boots. A woman drew her skirt aside in disgust and kept moving. Lenora stood still only a second before running towards him. Lenora dropped to her knees in the snow beside the fallen stranger. His coat was soaked through, the cloth so worn it had thinned at the elbows and cuffs. Ice clung to the edges of his beard. When she touched his shoulder, she felt a violent trembling beneath the fabric. His skin burned with fever, even while the cold tried to claim him. "Sir, can you hear me?" His eyelids fluttered but did not open. A cracked breath escaped him, shallow and painful. One hand, thin but strangely elegant in shape, tightened weakly against the ground before slipping still again. The market moved around them with practiced indifference. A merchant carrying baskets of onions clicked his tongue. "Drag him elsewhere." A woman selling ribbons muttered that beggars always chose the busiest places to die. One of the city guards, wrapped in a heavy wool cloak and leather gloves, laughed as he passed. "Leave him there. Winter will finish what life forgot." Lenora looked up at him with quiet disgust, but the man had already moved on. She slid her arms beneath the stranger's shoulders. He was lighter than she expected, all bone and weakness. Even so, lifting him was difficult. Snow made the stones slick beneath her boots, and the wind pressed against her like a hand trying to push her back. "Come on, do not make me carry you alone." She half lifted, half dragged him through side lanes and across the broken path beyond the market. Her breath came hard. Twice she nearly slipped. Once she had to stop and brace him against a wall while dizziness passed her from hunger. By the time the ruined chapel came into view, dusk had deepened and the snow fell thicker. Inside St. Bartholomew's broken walls, the air was bitter but stiller than outside. Lenora laid him on her sacks of gunny sacks and knelt beside him, rubbing warmth into his hands. She removed his boots, emptied of shape by years of wear, then wrung melted snow from the hems of his trousers. Her supper sat wrapped in cloth beside a stone pillar, one small loaf of coarse brown bread she had saved since morning. She stared at it only a moment. Then she broke it in half, softened one piece with water, and pressed it gently to his lips. "Chew if you can." At first he did not respond. Then, slowly, as though the body remembered before the mind did, he swallowed. She fed him in patient fragments until the bread was gone. The second half she meant to keep for herself, but when he coughed and reached weakly, she gave him that too. Her stomach tightened in protest. She ignored it. The chapel had no proper fire, only a shallow metal basin she used when she found coal scraps. Tonight there were 2 small pieces left and a handful of broken wood. She coaxed flame from tinder and warmed rainwater in a dented pot. Into it she crushed dried mint leaves and bitter herb stems an old woman once taught her to use for fever. Then she looked at her blanket. It was thin, patched, and the only thing between her and freezing nights. Without hesitation, she tore it down the middle. The sound echoed softly through the empty chapel. She covered the old man with one half and wrapped the other around his shoulders and chest. After that, she wiped his face, cleaned mud from his brow, and changed the cloth on his forehead whenever it grew hot. Hours passed. Wind moaned through broken stone arches. Snow drifted in through gaps where stained glass had once glowed. Lenora sat beside him, fighting sleep, knees tucked beneath her chin, hands raw from cold. Sometimes he muttered in fever, names she did not know, places spoken with the clear accent of a gentleman. Once he whispered, "Damien, no." Near midnight, his breathing eased. Just before dawn, she woke to find him watching her. His eyes were pale grey, tired but sharp. Even lying on sacks in ruined clothing, there was something unmistakably dignified about the way he held himself. He did not glance around in panic or complain of discomfort. He studied the chapel as though measuring it, then turned back to her. "You remained," he said. His voice was rough with illness, yet educated and steady. "I had nowhere else to be," Lenora answered. He tried to sit. She helped him carefully. Up close, she noticed his hands. Though scarred and thin, they bore the shape of someone long used to pens, reins, and rings, not labor. His nails were trimmed despite neglect. A faded line marked one finger where a heavy signet had once rested. "What is your name?" she asked. He hesitated long enough for the silence to mean something. "Edmund," he said at last. She knew at once it was not the whole truth, but she did not press him. "I am Lenora." He looked at the torn blanket wrapped around him, the empty plate, the herbs, the chapel floor, then at her hollow cheeks. "You gave me food." "Yes." "You have little yourself." "Yes." Why help a stranger no one else wanted? Lenora lowered her gaze to the dying fire. "Because no one helped me." For a moment he said nothing. Then tears gathered quietly in the corners of his eyes. He turned his face aside, as if ashamed to be seen weeping. No one had ever cried because of her kindness before. To spare him embarrassment, Lenora rose and gathered his wet coat from where she had lain it near the wall. She shook it gently before hanging it on a cracked iron hook to dry. Something heavy struck the stone floor. Both of them looked down. A ring had fallen from the inner pocket. It was thick gold, old and finely made, engraved with a crest so deeply cut that even years of dirt had not hidden it. A rearing stag beneath the crown. Ashcroft. Her breath caught. Edmund's face drained of color. Before either could speak, hoofbeats thundered outside the chapel walls. Voices barked orders through the snow. A hammer struck wood again and again somewhere near the market road. Lenora moved to the doorway and peered through the falling white. Mounted riders were nailing posters to every post and wall. Across the top, in bold black letters, were the words, "Wanted, dangerous old man."
By sunrise, Blackmere no longer spoke of bread prices or weather. It spoke of the posters. They appeared on market walls, church gates, tavern doors, and lampposts still crusted with snow. Riders in dark cloaks hammered them into place, while boys ran behind, reading the words aloud for coins. Wanted, dangerous old man. Reward offered for immediate information, by order of Ashcroft Keep. The name alone was enough to silence jokes. Within Ashcroft Keep, the morning moved with the speed of fear. Fires burned in long marble halls, boots struck polished floors, footmen bowed too low and too quickly, secretaries carried ledgers with both hands. No servant dared speak above a whisper. Duke Damien Ashcroft stood in the eastern study beside a tall window overlooking the frozen city. He wore a black coat cut with military sharpness, gloves fitted perfectly, and no ornament beyond a silver watch chain. The room around him was magnificent. Dark oak shelves, maps framed in gilt, a globe from Italy, crystal decanters untouched on a tray, but none of it softened him. He read the latest report without expression. "No confirmed sighting?" he asked. The magistrate before him swallowed. "Several claims, Your Grace, nothing reliable." Damien set the paper down with precise calm. "Then make reliability profitable." "Yes, Your Grace. Double the reward." The man blinked. "At once. And if any constable ignores this order, replace him by evening." The magistrate bowed so quickly his papers slipped. When he had gone, Mr. Haldon entered without being announced. Age had bent his shoulders, but sharpened his eyes. He had served the Ashcroft household longer than most men remembered. "This fraud grows bolder, using your family crest to stir gossip." Damien's jaw tightened. He will regret it. It would be wise to seize him before newspapers scent scandal. They will scent nothing. Haldon inclined his head with practiced approval. "Your father's memory deserves protection." At that word, something colder passed through Damien's face. "My father abandoned protection when he fled." He turned back to the window, ending the matter. Across the city, tenants in the lower quarter straightened when Ashcroft riders passed. Shopkeepers offered information, whether they had any or not. Mothers pulled children indoors. Even honest men feared being noticed by the Duke's search. At the ruined chapel, Lenora watched all of it from behind broken stone. She had moved Edmund deeper inside, behind what remained of the altar wall. She cleaned the ring and wrapped it in cloth, then tucked it beneath loose bricks where only she knew. "You should leave me," the old man said quietly. "They seek trouble, and I carry it. You can barely stand. That has not stopped trouble before." She almost smiled, despite the fear. Over the next days, his fever broke slowly. Color returned to his face. Strength crept back into hands that once shook lifting a cup.
Lenora scavenged broth bones from a cook she sometimes helped, boiled them with onions and stale crusts, and brought the thin soup back steaming in a dented pot. He ate with gratitude and old manners. When she misread a notice brought in from the street, he asked what schooling she had known. "Enough to count wages I rarely receive." By evening, he had her sounding out proper sentences from discarded newspapers. By the next day, he corrected her posture while she walked with a bucket balanced on one hip. "Shoulders back," he said. "The poor stoop because they are made to. Do not assist them." She laughed. "You command like a lord." "Habit," he murmured. He taught her names of kings, causes of wars, why forks were arranged in certain order, and how confidence often entered a room before beauty did. He spoke of estates, law, horses, and parliament with effortless familiarity. More than lessons, he gave her attention. He listened when she spoke. He asked what she thought. No one powerful had ever done either. Soon she found herself saving bits of bread to share with him, not from duty, but affection. He became less like a burden and more like family she had never expected again. One night, while snow melted from the chapel roof in slow drops, he sat beside the weak fire and looked at her for a long time. "You deserve truth," he said. Lenora waited. "My name is not Edmund." She already knew. "I am Lord Percival Hawthorne Ashcroft." The ruined chapel seemed to shift around her. She stared at the man in patched clothes and remembered the crest, the educated voice, the bearing no hardship had erased. "The Duke's father?" "Yes. But they said you ran away." "They said many profitable things." His hands tightened around the cup. "I was drugged for supper one night, hidden in country houses, moved whenever memory sharpened, papers forged, servants bought, men I trusted fed on my absence." Lenora could barely breathe. "Does the Duke know?" "He knows only what they taught a grieving boy." Sadness, not anger, filled his eyes. Before she could speak again, shouts exploded outside. Boots crushed snow, metal clinked, horses snorted near the lane. Lenora sprang to the doorway. Dark uniformed soldiers were spreading around the chapel ruins with muskets drawn. Lantern light flickered across stone walls. There were too many exits to run and too many to hide from. Then the footsteps came, measured, unhurried, absolute. A tall figure entered through the broken archway, removing one leather glove, finger by finger. Duke Damien Ashcroft stepped into the chapel. The broken chapel seemed to shrink when Duke Damien Ashcroft entered. Cold air moved behind him with the soldiers, carrying the smell of wet leather, steel, and horses. Snowflakes melted on the shoulders of his black coat. He was taller than Lenora expected, broad through the chest, composed in a way that made anger appear more dangerous because it never rushed. His face was striking, severe, and unreadable. His eyes passed over Lenora only once before fixing on the old man by the fire. "So," Damien said, voice low and controlled, "the city phantom has found shelter." Percival rose slowly, one hand on the cracked stone wall for balance. Fever had left him weak, but something proud straightened inside him. "You have grown into your mother's eyes," he said. The words landed strangely in the chapel. Damien's jaw hardened. "Do not speak of my family." He crossed the room in 3 steps, seized Percival by the front of his coat, and dragged him toward the doorway. The old man stumbled hard against loose stone. Lenora gasped and rushed forward. "Stop!" She caught Damien's arm with both hands. Every soldier froze. The Duke looked down at her fingers on his sleeve as if no one had touched him without permission in years. "Remove yourself," he said. "No." The word escaped before fear could stop it. Outside the chapel, market people had gathered at a safe distance. News traveled quickly when Ashcroft men moved. Faces watched through snow and breath mist. Damien pulled Percival into the open square. Lenora followed and threw herself between them, spreading her thin arms in front of the old man. Gasps rippled through the crowd. No one stood between the Duke and anything. Damien's expression did not change, yet the silence around him deepened. "Move aside," he said. "You are hurting a sick man. He is a fraud using my father's name. He is hungry, half frozen and old. He is dangerous." Lenora's cheeks burned with cold and fury. Dangerous to whom? Men who survive on lies? Several guards shifted uneasily. Damien's gaze sharpened. She should have stopped. Every instinct warned her, yet years of being stepped over rose inside her like fire. "You punish weakness because you fear truth." The square inhaled as one body. A woman dropped the basket in her hands. A boy crossed himself. Even the horses seemed to still. Two guards looked to Damien, awaiting the command that would strike her down, imprison her, or worse. Instead, he said nothing. He studied her face, her torn shawl, the snow in her hair, the defiance shaking through her despite terror. Lenora's knees wanted to fail. She kept them locked. Behind her, Percival gave a weak laugh that turned into coughing. When he caught breath again, he said, "She has more courage than your whole court, Damien." The Duke's eyes flickered once at hearing his name spoken so familiarly. Then he stepped back. "Take the old man," he ordered. Soldiers moved in carefully, lifting Percival rather than dragging him this time. "And the girl?" asked the captain. Damien kept his gaze on Lenora. "She comes as well." Fear finally pierced her anger. "I have done nothing." "That remains to be determined." They were placed in separate motor carriages outside the square. Lenora had never ridden in one. The leather seats smelled of polish and wealth. Snow-streaked streets passed behind glass, while guards sat opposite with rifles across their knees. Blackmere changed as they climbed toward the upper quarter. Beggars disappeared. Windows grew larger, streets cleaner, lamps brighter. Houses stood behind iron gates and trimmed hedges, untouched by hardship. Then Ashcroft Keep rose ahead. It was larger than any story had prepared her for. Dark stone towers, carved balconies, iron gates tall as church doors, and long rows of lit windows burning against the storm. Servants in livery waited beneath covered steps, while fountains stood frozen in elegant silence. Lenora was led inside through doors taller than chapel walls. Warmth struck first, then light. Marble floors gleamed beneath chandeliers heavy with crystal. Paintings of stern ancestors watched from gilded frames. A staircase curved upward like something built for kings. Footmen lined the hall in perfect posture, though many stared before lowering their eyes. At the sight of Lenora's ragged hem and worn boots, whispers began. A noblewoman covered her smile behind a glove. A young gentleman muttered, "Has the Duke imported charity?" Another answered, "Or scandal." Servants looked differently, some curious, some pitying, some frightened for her. For the first time, Lenora saw the world that crushed people like her from above, not as rumor, but architecture. Percival was taken down a side corridor by physicians and guards. He looked back once. She tried to follow, but a footman blocked her path. Then heels clicked across marble. Lady Beatrice Holloway descended the staircase in pale silk, the color of winter cream. Diamonds rested at her throat like frost. She was exquisitely beautiful, every movement graceful, every smile measured. She approached Damien first. "My dear, the whole house was worried." Her voice flowed like warm honey. She touched his sleeve possessively, then turned to Lenora. The smile remained, only the eyes changed. They traveled over Lenora's patched dress, rough hands, wind-burned skin, and loosened braid with surgical contempt. "And who," Beatrice asked softly, "is this?" "A witness," replied Damien. How useful. She circled Lenora slowly, perfume trailing behind her. Guests nearby pretended not to watch. What devotion to bring strays home in weather like this! A few noblemen laughed too quickly. Lenora held her chin up, though dirt marked her cuffs. Beatrice stopped before the head housekeeper. See that the girl is washed, contained, and placed below stairs. She glanced once more at Lenora, smiling beautifully. Where strays belong. Morning in Ashcroft Keep began long before daylight touched the towers. Bells rang through servant corridors hidden behind panelled walls. Fires were stirred, silver polished, rugs beaten, baths carried, trays prepared, boots brushed, and breakfast tables dressed with fruit, eggs, smoked fish, cream, preserves, and fresh rolls. Lenora was placed in the middle of us all. The room given to her was not truly a room, but a narrow alcove near the laundry stairs, with a cot, cracked basin, and one hook for clothing. Her own dress had been scrubbed, but remained threadbare. The housekeeper handed her coarse grey servant garments and informed her that gratitude was expected. Among the lower staff, she became a spectacle. Some pitied her for being dragged into noble quarrels. Others mocked her for believing the Duke had brought her for any reason beyond interrogation. Older maids warned her not to attract Lady Beatrice's attention. Younger footmen lingered too long nearby, curious about the girl from the streets who had spoken against Damien Ashcroft and lived. The noble women were worse. When they passed through corridors scented with wax and roses, they glanced at Lenora as if she were decorative dirt. One asked whether beggars now came with uniforms. Another dropped a handkerchief directly into a puddle and ordered Lenora to fetch it. She did, then handed it back with such calm dignity that the woman blushed before becoming angry. Beatrice's loyal staff made certain Lenora worked harder than others. She scrubbed marble steps on bruised knees, carried linen baskets larger than herself, polished silver until her wrists ached, and was sent running from kitchens to upper chambers without pause. Meals came late and cold, often only leftovers scraped from platters after guests had eaten pheasant, glazed carrots, sweet tarts, and cream custards. Still, Lenora watched. At midday, she was ordered to carry fresh towels near the west apartments, where Percival was kept under care. A physician entered with a tray of medicine. Minutes later, after he left, Haldon stepped from a side room, glanced down the corridor, uncorked the bottle, poured part away, and replaced it with clear liquid from another vial. His hands moved with habit. Lenora flattened herself behind a curtain until he passed. That evening, she delivered flowers near the library and heard voices through the door. "We cannot keep 2 sets much longer," Haldon said quietly. "Then burn the older ones. When I marry the Duke, no one will examine accounts that no longer exist." Lenora stood still as stone. Another morning, she carried flowers to the blue salon and saw Beatrice holding a bundle of unopened letters over the great fire. "These from tenant widows?" Beatrice asked a maid. "Yes, my lady." "Then they can remain unanswered in ashes." She dropped them into the flames, one by one. Lenora's anger rose hotter than the fire. She tried to warn Damien the next day when he crossed the North Gallery alone. "My lord, someone tampers with your father's medicine." He stopped, but did not fully turn. "You accuse my household boldly for a servant. I accuse what I saw, and what you see is shaped by ignorance." She stepped closer despite herself. Truth does not require breeding to recognize it. That earned his full attention. For a moment his eyes rested on her face with something unreadable, annoyance perhaps, or reluctant interest. "You mistake suspicion for wisdom," he said at last, and walked on. Yet after that, he began noticing what once passed unseen. He saw Lenora thank the kitchen maid by name for burnt toast no noble would touch. He watched her kneel to tie bandages to a scullery girl's blistered feet after Beatrice's dresser had overworked her. He noticed she returned a pearl brooch a guest dropped near the conservatory and asked no reward. When he questioned her sharply, she answered directly instead of flattering him. Most people around Damien either feared him or wanted something. Lenora seemed to do neither. Doubt, once planted, grew quietly. Beatrice noticed changes faster than anyone. Damien asked fewer details of wedding plans. He interrupted her twice to inquire after his father's appetite. He once dismissed a complaint about Lenora without punishment. That night, Beatrice smiled through supper and broke a crystal glass alone in her room afterwards. The banquet, held 3 evenings later, was grand enough to impress ambassadors. Chandeliers blazed over tables dressed in white linen and silver branches of candles. Platters of roasted duck, river trout, sugared figs, and almond pastries moved through the hall. Musicians played softly from the gallery. Lenora had been assigned wine service under strict warning not to be seen more than necessary. Guests whispered when they recognized her. "There is the chapel girl. The Duke keeps unusual souvenirs." Beatrice glittered at the center of the room in sapphire silk and diamonds. Damien sat beside her in formal black, distant as winter. Percival, pale but stronger, had been brought in on a cushioned chair at Damien's insistence. Many guests stared at the returned ghost of Ashcroft Keep. Dessert had just been served when Beatrice rose suddenly. "My lord, I wish this were unnecessary." Every fork paused. She held up an empty velvet case. "My diamond clasp is missing." Murmurs spread. She turned slowly, eyes resting on Lenora. "This servant was near my chamber." Her pulse struck hard. "I was sent there with laundry." "Precisely." Damien's face hardened. "Search her." 2 guards moved before she could speak. Hands seized her wrists. Gasps of delighted scandal rippled among the nobles. Some women hid smiles behind fans. Lenora stood in the center of the hall, humiliated but unbowed, while everyone watched in satisfaction. Then, from his chair at the high table, Percival gripped the armrests, pushed himself upward, and stood for the first time in years. Percival stood unsteadily, one hand gripping the carved chair beside him, yet the room felt as though a giant had risen. The guards holding Lenora hesitated, nobles leaned forward, even the musicians in the gallery lowered their instruments. "That girl is innocent," Percival said. Age had weakened his body, but not the authority in his voice. It carried cleanly beneath the chandeliers and through the scented heat of the ballroom. Beatrice recovered first. She placed one elegant hand against her chest. "My lord, you are unwell. Sit before you strain yourself." "It is you who have strained this house." Color left her cheeks. Percival looked toward the nearest guard. "Search Lady Beatrice's right sleeve." Gasps moved like wind through wheat. Beatrice stepped back. "How dare!" The guard glanced to Damien. The Duke's face was stone. "Do it." The man reached carefully into the silk lining of her sleeve and withdrew a glittering diamond clasp. Silence hit harder than shouting. Lenora closed her eyes once, not in triumph, but relief. Beatrice's mouth opened, then closed again. "A trick! Someone planted it there." "Yes," Percival answered. "You." Mr. Holden rose from his place near the side wall. "This spectacle is beneath the dignity of Ashcroft Keep." "No," Percival said. "What you built beneath its roof was." He motioned toward a footman waiting nervously near the doors. The man stepped forward carrying a leather case Lenora recognized from Percival's chamber. With shaking hands, he opened it on the banquet table. Inside lay letters, account books, seals, and folded legal papers tied with ribbon. Percival spoke without haste. "These are copies of the forged letters declaring I abandoned my family. Here are payments made to physicians who kept me sedated. Here are transfers from estate funds into private accounts controlled by Mr. Holden. Here are agreements with Holloway interests drafted after my disappearance." The ballroom erupted. Guests rose from chairs. Ladies whispered fiercely behind gloved hands. Men demanded to inspect documents. Servants stared openly at the steward they had feared for years. Damien took one paper, then another. His eyes moved rapidly across signatures, dates, sums. This cannot be true, though the words sounded less certain than desperate. Percival met his gaze. It is the truth you were raised to hate. A physician near the rear doors suddenly fell to his knees. "I was paid," he cried, "only to administer drafts, never to kill, I swear." Another servant burst into tears and confessed carrying false correspondence to newspapers. Then more voices came. A maid testified Beatrice ordered letters from widows burned unread. A clerk admitted altering rent ledgers under Holden's instructions. A driver described transporting Percival between remote houses under secrecy. Each confession struck Damien harder than the last. He stood in the middle of the hall like a man watching his own reflection shatter. "I enforced deaths from stolen books," he said faintly. No one answered. "I dismissed honest men because liars advised me." His hands trembled for the first time anyone present had ever seen. Beatrice hurried to him, tears perfectly placed in her eyes. "Damien, listen to me. My father arranged matters before I understood. I wished only to protect you." He did not look at her. She caught his sleeve. "We can survive scandal together." Still nothing. The softness vanished from her face like paint washed off in rain. "You ungrateful fool," she hissed. "Without me, you would still be a wounded boy barking orders in your father's shadow." The nearest nobles recoiled. Holden chose that moment to run. He moved surprisingly fast for an old man, but guards were faster. They seized him near the west doors and dragged him back struggling, his polished dignity torn away at last. Damien's voice returned, cold and clear. "Mr. Holden, you are under arrest for fraud, theft, unlawful confinement, and treason against this house." Then he turned to Beatrice. "Our engagement is ended." She stared as though struck. "You cannot dismiss me before witnesses." "I just have. Think what society will say." "I have spent too many years thinking only of that." He motioned to the guards. "Escort Lady Beatrice Holloway from Ashcroft Keep. Her family's accounts are to be examined before dawn." Her scream followed them down the corridor long after she was gone. Damien dismissed the guests with formal apology. No one resisted. They fled eagerly, carrying enough scandal to feed London for months. When the hall emptied, he remained alone with Percival. Father and son faced one another across the wreckage of dessert plates, spilled wine, and candles burned low. "I believed them," Damien said. "You were a child. I became worse than they were." Percival's eyes softened with grief. "You became what pain was trained to become." Damien sank into a chair and covered his face with both hands. Shoulders that had never bowed in public shook in private silence. "I wronged you," he said hoarsely. "I wronged this city." Percival crossed slowly and placed a hand on his son's shoulder. The next evening, nobles, servants, clerks, guards, and household staff were summoned to the great hall. Lenora stood uncertain near the staircase, in a simple, clean dress provided by the housekeeper, who now treated her with nervous respect. Damien entered without ceremony. No sword, no gloves, no title announced. He walked directly to Lenora and dropped to one knee on the marble floor. Shock moved through the hall. "I judged truth by clothing. I repaid kindness with suspicion. I ask your forgiveness." Lenora looked at the man everyone feared and saw not power, but the cost of it. "Forgiveness," she said quietly, "is not spoken once, it is proven daily." He lowered his head in acceptance. Outside, beyond the tall windows, dawn waited over Blackmere. And when morning came, the city would wake to a different Duke. Winter loosened its grip over Blackmere. Snow withdrew from rooftops in dirty patches, then vanished from lanes altogether. Market fountains flowed again. Bare branches along the upper road softened into green. With the changing season came changes no one believed possible. Ashcroft rent collectors no longer arrived like executioners. Old debts were reviewed and reduced where hunger had made payment impossible. Families who feared eviction received written extensions stamped with the Ashcroft seal. Mill workers saw wages corrected after years of false deductions. Widow petitions, once burned unopened, were now answered with coal, flour, and coin. Shelters received funds before ballrooms received flowers. People spoke the Duke's name differently. Not warmly at first. Fear does not disappear in a week. But suspicion gave way to surprise, and surprise slowly made room for respect. Duke Damien Ashcroft seemed determined to earn every inch of it. He rode through tenant lands without escort fanfare. He stood in muddy fields listening to farmers complain about drainage and seed prices. He entered kitchens where cooks expected inspection and instead asked what supplies were lacking. He walked warehouses, mills, and stables with sleeves rolled above his wrists, carrying ledgers under one arm and sacks under the other when needed. More than once, men stopped working simply to stare. Those who once trembled before him now found him asking names, remembering them later, and keeping promises he had made in plain speech. Percival watched much of it from carriage windows or shaded garden benches as strength returned to him day by day. The color in his face deepened, his hands steadied. He resumed long breakfasts of eggs, smoked trout, toast with marmalade, and tea taken near sunlight. Yet what pleased him most was not comfort, it was seeing his son attempt humility. "There," he said once to Lenora, as Damien struggled beside gardeners lifting seed crates into a wagon. "That is heavier than pride, and better exercise." Lenora laughed. Her own life had transformed so gradually that some mornings she still woke startled by warmth. She was given rooms at Ashcroft Keep overlooking the East Gardens. Books arrived by the dozen. Tutors taught languages, accounts, law, and history. Seamstresses came with tapes and silk, though Lenora insisted several sturdy dresses be made before any grand gowns. She learned quickly because intelligence had always lived in her. It had simply lacked invitation. But she refused to become ornamental. With Ashcroft funds and her own insistence, the ruined chapel of St. Bartholomew was rebuilt stone by stone. Broken arches were restored, roofs repaired, windows glazed, beds laid with clean linen, and gardens planted where rubble once lay. It became a refuge for abandoned women, orphaned children, and those one misfortune away from the streets. Lenora walked its halls often. She knew where cold entered old walls. She knew how shame sat in the posture of the newly poor. She knew the sound of someone pretending hunger did not hurt. No one turned away hungry while she governed there. Blackmere noticed everything. The same merchants who once stepped around her now bowed when her carriage passed. Shopkeepers sent samples without charge. Mothers pointed her out to daughters as proof that grace did not require birth. Young ladies copied the way she tied ribbons or chose simple pearls over heavy display. Some praised her from admiration, others from convenience. Lenora knew the difference. By the time winter returned, Ashcroft Keep held the grandest ball the city had seen in years. Chandeliers blazed like captured stars. Garlands of evergreen and white roses wound around columns. Tables gleamed with silver bowls of sugared fruits, roast pheasant, glazed chestnuts, and towers of spun sugar so delicate children were warned not to breathe near them. Music floated from the gallery as nobles arrived in velvet, satin, and jewels bright enough to rival frost. Many of them had laughed when Lenora first entered those doors in rags. Tonight they waited to be presented. She descended the great staircase in ivory silk threaded lightly with silver. her hair arranged with fresh winter blossoms and a single heirloom clasp Percival had chosen for her. There was nothing excessive in her beauty, which made it impossible to ignore. Conversation faltered. Men straightened, women stared. Old gossips forgot their next sentences. A merchant who once cursed her for standing near his oranges bowed so low he nearly lost balance. A baroness begged an introduction for her nephew. Ladies who once mocked her patched sleeves now praised the elegance of simplicity. Lenora accepted courtesy without surrendering memory. Across the ballroom, Damien stood watching. He wore formal black with a white waistcoat and carried himself with the calm strength of a man no longer performing hardness. The room respected him now, not because it feared punishment, but because it had seen correction. He crossed through dancers, diplomats, officers, widows, and bankers, until he reached her beneath the central chandelier. The orchestra softened. People sensed history and made space for it. For the second time in her life, Duke Damien Ashcroft knelt before Lenora Ashby. But there was no scandal now, no shame, no broken man asking escape from guilt, only honesty. I have nothing worthy enough to offer except what I am trying to become. Not power, not title, not gratitude, only love if you will have it. The hall held its breath. Lenora looked down at the man who once ruled through fear, then rose through repentance. She thought of snow, hunger, ruined stone, and the night kindness changed everything. Smiling, she took his hands and lifted him to his feet. Yes. The applause shook the chandeliers. Percival wiped his eyes openly. Servants grinned behind trays. Even stern old clerks laughed like boys. And as music rose again over Blackmere's brightest night, one truth stood above all others. The girl they once stepped over in the snow became the woman before whom all Blackmere stood.